This is a podcast from the Red House, the former home of Benjamin Britten and Peter Pears. I'm Lucy Walker. Join me, colleagues and other guests for a monthly chat about all things Britten and Pears, plus music, culture, heritage in general, and anything else that might come up. So this is the first From the Red House podcast we're having a go at. And so my name is Lucy Walker. I'm the Director of Public Programming and Learning here at the Red House. And this is
Sarah Bardwell, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Britten Pears Foundation, which runs the Red House.
We're going to talk about what it is we do at the Red House because, just as an introduction, because I think a lot of people don't understand what it is that we do or the extent and variety of what happens here at the Red House. So perhaps we could just start by just talking about who lived here, who we are, what we do, where we are, what kind of organisation it is, just for starters.
Oh, that's quite a big paragraph. Right, okay, we'll try that. So, the people that lived here that we particularly celebrate are Benjamin Britten, the composer, and his partner, the singer, Peter Pears. They moved in 1957 and lived here until Benjamin Britten died in 1976 and Peter Pears died in 1986. So they were here for a good chunk of their lives, weren't they?
Yes, and before here, lived in another house on the seafront in Aldborough, facing the sea for 10 years, and before that in Snape, just down the road. So they were, and principally because of Britain, completely Suffolk-based.
Yeah, and of course, Britain was born in Lowestoft, so he really was a through and through Suffolk boy. And it was lucky that Pears liked it, I guess, otherwise he might not have wanted to come back.
He had a few trips down to London. He liked getting away, going on tour, getting out, a bit of metropolitan life, then back to the countryside. Whereas Britain, sort of, this was his patch. This was what he liked and loved most of all.
Absolutely. So the Red House, we talk about their life here in the building, in the actual building they lived at the Red House, but we actually go much further than that, I think. And there's so much to discover here. The galleries, the sort of information galleries, if you like, which talk about, particularly about Britain's life, but also develop the story about him meeting Pears and their work together. But they are fascinating. There's so much in there. It's really quite a dense exhibition, isn't it?
Yeah, it's considering it's quite a small space, and if actually we put all of the collections that we have relating to Britain on display, we would need a building the size of
St Paul's.
St Paul's.
It's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah, at least just to kind of display everything that we have, because Britain, and I think it's probably true, we've probably got the most resources relating to one single composer of any other composers. He just kept everything from checkbook stubs to the manuscript of Peter Grimes. So there's quite a big range in between that.
Yes, actually, it's really interesting you say. We're always quite tentative about saying whether we're the biggest collection of composer material in one place. And in fact, I heard one of our colleagues talking about it, and he said, well, we're definitely the biggest freestanding collection of composer material. And I think that probably is true. He said, because Copeland's material, the composer Copeland, is all in another institution. Is it at
Library of Congress?
Yeah. So we are the biggest freestanding. Yeah. Now, obviously, we don't have a building the size of St Paul's here, but we have some things on display, and the rest of it we keep in a purpose-built archive, which was built in 2013 and opened to the public. So there is a way of sharing more material in that space.
Yes, and through that space, which is, as you say, open to the public, as is the rest of the space. So the collections that people can see and have access to fall into, I guess would it be three categories? So there's the archive, which you've just mentioned, and then the house itself with all its furniture and teacups and curtains and carpets that belong to them, and then also the library, which is another room that has all their collection of books, and then there's four things: the huge collection of art that was collected by Peter Pears.
Yeah, but you can't miss out my favourite space, which is the composer studio,
yes,
which is where Britten composed from about 1957 till the end of the 60s, wasn't it? So he composed the Wool Requiem in there, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and that I think is a really magical space. His desk is in there, the stool that he sat at, you can see the manuscript paper. It's all actually everything here is all the actual stuff they had, and that's the most exciting thing. And you go into that space And it's magical. You can see the same view out of the window that he would have seen. And there's even that recording of him speaking. I just love that. Anyone I take him there, I'm like, quickly, play the recording of Britten talking about this space. It's kind of an amazing thing that you just don't get. There can't be another artist studio where it's so kind of complete. Any kind of artist. I mean, not just a composer, but a visual artist or any kind of artist.
That's absolutely true. And you get... and hearing him talk in that room is quite evocative, not just because it's him and it's his room, but because his voice comes from a completely different era.
It is very good, I think, that we should have nice places to work in. Now, I'm not going to be a silly old man and say how dreadful life was when we were young and how we used to work in dark black cellars and beaten every day of our lives, because it simply wasn't true.
And I gather that wasn't his quite his normal. That was his posh speaking voice. I think he was a bit looser,
like the ones we're using right now.
Yeah, precisely. Yes, exactly. I just wonder whether we should talk about, because we casually mentioning Benjamin Britten composer, maybe we should say something. If you've never heard of Benjamin Britten,
yes,
what's the thing you need to know about him? What's the one thing, the many things you might need to know about Benjamin Britten?
What is the thing you need to know?
He was in Suffolk, he was a composer, he had a really big house. And
it's also good to know that he was more than a composer, wasn't he? I mean, he was a brilliant pianist, he was a great conductor, he was I guess in some ways he was a real Renaissance man. He had so many interests, actually, because it sort of sounds like he just spent the whole time sitting there writing music. But of course, he was really, really broad interests in art, in literature, in people. I think he really must have liked people. I mean, lots of people say that he would drop people or didn't like them, but actually he cared about people, and not just actually people he knew, but a much wider community.
Yeah, that's true, because you get the impression he was quite introverted, whereas Peter Pears, as a performer, as a singer, who was out there singing Britten's pieces, was much more of an extrovert figure. Britten seemed quite introverted, but in that way that introverts sometimes are, he could kind of communicate brilliantly to a large number of people, and that was his main aim, was to have his music listened to by as many people as possible, and for them to enjoy, to participate in, to perform. And that's something that here we try and follow that example and communicate, because people do have this view that although classical music is difficult and hard to find a way into, but his music in particular is difficult and is hard to find a way into. Yeah. And we work quite hard to try and suggest that it's not difficult, it is for everybody, and his music actually has this massive variety that you don't necessarily want to start with a massive opera, but you could start with something small scale or whatever. And he wrote such a big variety of pieces.
I think that's completely true. I'm still amazed that people think it's completely acceptable to come up to me and say, "Oh, I hate Britten's music." I mean, well, acceptable to say it anyway, not just to me, but just think that. Yeah. Because if you think, take something, the Ceremony of Carols, I just think you cannot listen to that without having a little kind of...
It's completely charming.
It's completely charming. It doesn't matter if you don't know anything about music, you don't know anything, you can't even read music, you can just hear it. It's a wonderful thing to hear. Maybe not even all of it, just pick a little bit of it and listen to it. Yeah. I actually didn't really get to know it till I was quite old, I don't think. And now I don't know when I first heard it, but I know some people, they've sung it every year since they were 7, and they're now 77. I just think, they're so lucky to have that completely embedded within them. But actually, you don't need to have done that, because you can literally just listen to it now.
Yeah. And there's lots of pieces like that.
Yeah,
and it's not, when you do get into it and you sing it and you perform it, it is quite tricky. It's not sort of easy music in that he's sort of making it easy for people necessarily. He wants to challenge people when they perform it and sing it, but that's part of the reward. And then at the end of it, you get this great experience, and that's the case. But when you listen to it, actually, it just feels effortless.
It completely. But so much of his music does that, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, let's not. We could go and give lots more examples, but we'll do that in later podcasts.
Yes. But as it happens, I mean, we've been making quite a lot of effort to talk about individual pieces, and we have, as it happens, on our own website, big resources for people to go and explore more. So particularly our Work of the Week series, which we did a couple of years ago, which there are 54 pieces or thereabouts that you can go and explore, including Ceremony of Carols, and just have somebody talking about them. You get extracts of the piece, and it's a good way in. If you don't know where to start with Britain, you can start with those.
So should we just go through what might happen if you came to visit the Red House? So we open at 1:30, and we actually really encourage people to come at that time because there's so much to do here. And, last entry is 4:30, so we really need to you've got to pack it all in. So you can visit the house in which he lived. You can see, all of downstairs, which is sort of dining room, living room, a breakfast room. Then you can go upstairs and be guided around a couple of the bedrooms, and also Peter Pears has got a studio upstairs. So that's quite a key sort of central piece of a visit. You then go into the composer's studio. You can go into the library, which is their library, which also has their beautiful Steinway in it. You can go into the gallery spaces. There's usually a temporary exhibition on to see. And then the archive. And hopefully you should be able to get access to that as well and speak to one of our brilliant archivists. But that is all set in this beautiful 5-acre site, and the gardens are completely gorgeous, and they seem to get more and more gorgeous every year, which is really, really exciting. So we think it's it's 45 minutes minimum, but 3 hours is quite a handy amount of time to be here for.
45 minutes is quite a gallop, I think, because you could spend... Because the gallery has audio guides as well, so you can listen to a whole ton of music. You could technically spend about 2.5 hours in there if you were a real completist and wanted to listen to everything.
Yes.
That's quite a commitment. But yeah, at least an hour, I would say, to really steep yourself in it. Plus, you can have a cup of tea and a biscuit.
You can do that.
Which is, something.
Which you might need if you're going to spend 2.5 hours in the gallery spaces.
Exactly. We also, in terms of what we do, so what we do is look after this place, and it's open to the public, and we look after that opening to the public. But we have events, we have concerts, we have talks where you can come and find out more about Britain's music. We have regular sessions for children. So we've got actually just this morning for the under fives, mini music makers, a very popular ticket in town. And during holidays, there's also activities as well for children and families. What else do we do? We do
amazing discovery sessions. You always forget the things that you do.
Yeah, so modest.
Lucy, so modest. Lucy leads these brilliant discovery sessions when you can really... Actually, not always Britain, sometimes other music that maybe of his contemporaries that was around during the English... Well, actually, not even always English music. And we really do try and discover a lot of music. And they're morning sessions usually, where you really get into a piece and... pull it apart. Not necessarily, again, you don't have to read music to go to those sessions. Absolutely, you can understand it from absolutely as you can come in with as much or as little knowledge as you have, and just gain some more. I mean, they are really special. And then at the end, don't you normally, depending on how long the piece is, listen to it sort of as a gathered... It's not quite a book group because they haven't done their homework separately, but it's a real sharing moment, and part of that group you listen to the music, don't you?
You listen to and you listen to it often just sitting in a room with no other distraction, because unless we're watching a film of it, if it's an opera, and we don't have time to listen to a whole opera, but if it's just a piece, and just that experience of listening in a room with however many people come that day to a piece from beginning to end is a kind of very mellow experience, regardless of what the piece is. There is something about that, sharing in it and not doing anything else. So you're not listening to it while you're doing the ironing or cooking or whatever. Yeah, you're actually just listening to it.
But also it's different to listening to it if you're listening to it live. Yeah. Because it's not quite the performance. It's not a performance in that way, and there aren't those sort of structure around how you listen to music. And it's a really different experience. It's fascinating how that works. Yeah. So we do those. They are quite fun. We have scratch choir days, which are also brilliant. We work very hard on... when you come to the site, you can visit things called... you can listen to things called the Box of Delights, which shows various treats from the archive which get pulled out. So and we're trying to look at ways of making those available online. We're trying to develop that because we think that'll be a really interesting thing to share. I don't know if I found quite often that the word archive seems to scare people quite a bit. And even though we open the archive to people, visitors on site, we've found that only half of the visitors who come actually make it to the archive because it sounds like something they wouldn't be interested in or want to do. And in fact, it's a brilliant place to go to. There's so much stuff in there. Yeah. And not just music, which you might not be able to read, but all sorts of paraphernalia, all sorts of bits and pieces, crazy letters, random letters, odd objects. Yeah. It's a great space. So if you get a chance to go to an archive, but any archive, I encourage you wholeheartedly.
And archives themselves are becoming wise to this, just generally. Yeah. And I think a few years ago it was like that. It was you could only come if you had what was considered a legitimate research interest or whatever. Whereas I think now a lot of archives are realising that, I guess this material is for everybody. This isn't, unless it's for some particular reason, a very secret stash somewhere. It should be available for anybody to come and consult.
Yeah, because what's the point of preserving it and conserving it for future generations when you're not letting anyone look at it? It's so important. Yeah. Anyway, I'm one of my hobby horses. But the thing is, Lucy, we should really make clear is that if you don't like Britain, if you can't get into it, if you do find it hard and or you don't have time to try, you can still come here and enjoy this place on a completely sort of unmusical, if that doesn't sound too negative, but there's so much here. I mean, if you look at the art, if you want to see how they lived, if you want to see their furniture, you don't need to know anything about music to do any of those things. And the gardens, of course, just speak for themselves. Yeah.
One other thing we have here is a scheme called Creative Retreats, which is because we have a number of properties on the site. So there's the Red House itself, there's the archive building, but there's also 3 other properties that we own. 2 of them were built by Britten and Pears for female friends of theirs, which was extremely generous of them.
They were brilliant,
They were brilliant for that. One for the artist Mary Potter, who used to live in the Red House. And a complicated story, swapped houses with Britten. She moved down to the seafront, found that house too big. And then they built her a studio and a house in the grounds of the Red House. So she moved back to the site. And lived there from the 60s up until the time that she died, and has a purpose-built studio in there. So there's that. And
that's an artist studio.
It's an artist studio.
Artist, wasn't
she? She was an artist. Yeah. So it's a gorgeous north-facing studio with a huge window in it. Also, their housekeeper, Miss Hudson, who'd been with them since the seafront days, and then moved to the Red House with them and retired in the 70s. And they built her a little house when she retired, and she moved in there, and that's called Cosy Nook.
She named it, I think. I don't think that name was anything to do with Britten or Pears.
But it's cute. It's a cute name, cute little house. And we also have a house called Home Reach, which is a house that was nothing as such to do with Britten and Pears, but was next door. And there's also Church Walk, which belonged to a person we haven't mentioned yet, Imogen Holst, who was a composer and a conductor and all-round amazing lady.
And great assistant to Benjamin Britten.
Yes, and also daughter of Gustav Holst, and she had a little house, really a little house, between here and the town centre, and we own that too. So these houses are, instead of just them sitting there lying empty, which would be a great waste, we offer them to composers, other creative artists, researchers, performers to use, and they can come and stay for what we call a creative retreat up to 2 weeks for the year. And that's just for free, so they just have to get themselves here, and then it's just their time and space to do whatever it is they need to do.
Yeah, and then they are great opportunities. I mean, not just because they provide the actual practical space and all that kind of stuff, and it uses these properties that are so connected to the site here, but it's actually what we know Britten himself really valued. It was space, it was time, it was place away from everybody else. And indeed, of course, he bought, when he had the Red House, he then bought himself a little retreat, didn't he? It got so busy here at the Red House with people knowing he was around and aeroplanes flying over making lots of noise. About half an hour away, he bought this little cosy, I actually have never seen it, I just imagine in my head that it was this lovely space where he could go and retreat and compose. So we're sort of hope we're providing. And of course, we absolutely do not expect anyone to make anything like Britten. That's not what we want people to do. We want them to do their own thing, but we want them to give them this space, which we think is really important and useful.
Definitely, yeah. We don't knock on the door and ask them to show us their homework.
What have you done today?
Yeah,
can we see that? No, definitely not.
And it has been proved very valuable and very very popular. So we're probably coming to the end of this initial podcast. So a little word on what we're planning to do for the next couple of them. Next time in February is LGBT History Month, and we have been very involved with that as an organisation. It's run by Schools Out for the last few years because Britten and Pears were a very prominent and important and significant gay couple from when they were first together in the late 30s up until Britten's death in the 70s, and for the majority of their relationship was illegal, and they were vulnerable to exposure and prosecution, and that part of their lives is something we are increasingly talking about and engaging with. And in fact 3 years ago we had a exhibition about it.
Amazing exhibition, which was so important and really showed how it's still a really relevant story today. And although we are going to be talking about it in February to mark the month, we do try and it's a constant story here. It's something that we are proud of, and we're pleased that we can share that story and that people find it interesting to hear about it and understand it a bit more. Yeah. So obviously we'll focus in February, but as I say, it runs out throughout the whole year. And any visit here is we don't shy away from talking about them as a really prominent and important gay couple.
And then in March, by the end of March, we will be very close to being merged with our sister organisation, Snape Maltings.
Exactly. That's meant to be happening on the 1st of April. So we hope to be able to talk about that in our March podcast. One of my colleagues described the merger as a long-running rom-com. It's like a 30-year relationship, and they don't talk to each other, and they're in Seattle and New York or whatever, however the story went. I think that's the only rom-com I've seen, actually. And they're getting together finally, and this is a big moment. Okay. What do you think of that analogy?
It's great. Is one of us going to be doing a dash to the airport or something? It's a kind of way of...
Yeah.
I hope so. I'd be up for that.
There's a few other scenes we won't be reenacting, you'll be pleased to know, though.
Okay. All right. That's fine. The relationship has been through all sorts of different phases.
Yeah, we should probably be clear that, Britten founded the Alba Festival, and that institution he created while he was alive, and it was run by a board of people that looked after it. I mean, he was on that board, but was very influential. And then when he died, they needed to the executors, I guess, needed to protect Britten's own personal legacy and all that he had, his art, his collection, his music, both the actual manuscript but also the performed music. And they set up a separate and different foundation to do that, which was entirely sensible. But of course, once you've got two separate bodies, they tend to take on their own lives, which again is not unexpected. But of course, they did come from the same person, and Pears as well was part of both of those stories. So it's really wonderful now that they have had their separate lives and they've grown up, but now they've sort of come to maturity, or they've grown up a bit more, and they've decided to come together. And I think that's really exciting, and I'm really hoping that as part of that merger, we can do more things even better. Both organisations can. And we'll talk about that a bit more in our March podcast.
Splendid.
What other treats? Any other treats?
Any other treats? Well, in general, our aim is to... so in terms of the podcast personnel, it will largely be either you, me, one of us, both of us, plus super exciting guests.
Exactly.
That is the plan. So, and often people pass through here, or we might talk to someone who's on a creative retreat, or there might be someone giving a recital, or there might be... So I think we're hoping to include other voices.
Absolutely. It'll get a bit dull just between the two of us. We also... we should look about when there's going to be Britten performed, and if we think that's... we want to try and encourage people to think about going to it, and we're going to see if we can get maybe people who are performing to come and talk to us about it. So, and it's going to be about once a month, we hope.
Once a month is the plan. I wanted it because this might be a bit naff. I'm just going to ask you, what was the last piece of music that you have listened to before this recording?
Okay. Now, I have been thinking about this, and actually it isn't the last piece of music I listened to, so is that allowed? Is that cheating already?
Cheating.
Okay, there's two things I wanted to... Two little highlights. Now, I've been listening to a lot of Mozart recently, which is weird. I don't normally. And I wonder whether it was actually because... It's been quite busy, there's a lot going on, rushing around and stuff. And somehow you listen to that. And actually Britain does it as well, but Britain's obviously quite work-related. But if you listen to Mozart, there's just space, isn't there? It's just kind of... I don't mean boring or still, but just there's just space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was driving to work in the morning listening to, well, I guess it was Breakfast on Radio 3 or whatever it's called, and they just played the C major piano sonata. What's that? I can't remember what vocal number it is. You'd recognise it. It's probably just about the only piece of piano music I can play. And I was listening, thinking, God, it was just so calm. And it was just perfect. I just really, really enjoyed that moment. But another treat that I've been getting quite excited about, at a different end of the spectrum actually, this one, but I read in the paper the other day that Killian Murphy, you know, the actor, who is lovely. I don't know, I've never met him. I'm assuming he's lovely.
I would say so.
Does these mixtapes on Radio 6. I think they go out, it's either 7 till 10 or it's that sort of evening slot on a Sunday evening. And I've started listening to them. That you can obviously go to whatever.
Just him, or every week? No.
Him. Well, I don't know if it's every week. I think he's done 15 volumes of mixtapes.
Wow.
And they're brilliant. They're just all sorts of different music. Not very much in the classical music genre, it has to be said, but all sorts of things from any decade, any country. I mean, it's sort of independent stuff, rock, but just it's just brilliant. And then you hear his gorgeous voice in between, just kind of. And you think of his eyes, and it's just fantastic.
Oh, man.
But the other exciting thing about Killian Murphy, of course, I have a slight vested interest. There was, at some point, there was talk about a Benjamin Britten film, and there was discussion about Killian Murphy being Briton. And of course, I was very keen on this, and I was busy trying to encourage it. Now, there's always discussions about films, and they never really come to fruition, and I don't think that one. And I suspect no one will be able to afford Killian Murphy. But it's always a slight little dream of mine that
he would
be. Do you think he could be?
I don't see why not. Frankly,
eyes.
it's the eyes.
You'd accept him.
He didn't look anything like him, but
No.
That matters.
I mean, that is sort of what I've been listening to recently.
Yeah, no,
is
I
that
like
what you wanted?
Yeah, totes.
So, no, you've got to
Can I
tell
do
me what
mine?
you've been listening to.
Okay, well, I'll have two then.
Okay.
Well, one is actually, I've been listening to myself playing the piano. Because, I know, get me. We have a tribute event this evening to Britain's nurse, Rita Thompson, who died at the end of last year.
Oh, yeah.
And we had there was a funeral, and that was towards the end of last year, but we wanted to have a moment for Rita in the library here. And one of my colleagues had a brilliant idea that we should have it near Burns Night.
Because Rita was Scottish.
Because Rita was Scottish, and she also, when Britten was setting lots of Burns poetry very late in his life, she used to read out the poems in her fantastic Scottish accent. So we have 4 Burns songs that Britten composed and then were arranged for voice, originally for harp, then arranged for voice and piano by Colin Matthews. And I have been practicing those like mad because I have to play them. Oh. And I thought they were incredibly simple when I opened the book, and they just turned out not to be, as usual with Britten. But they're really beautiful, and I'm really looking forward to playing that with the soprano Maddie Holmes. So I've been listening to that.
Your pieces are very on message, on subject. I'm quite impressed.
Are they?
Yeah, well, they're Britain.
Oh, well, that is.
Yeah.
This one is not so much.
Okay, let's go.
At the complete other end of the scale, perhaps, I was taking my car in to be repaired this morning, and on my playlist came up on my USB stick. I listen to a lot of quite tacky pop music in my car.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a French pop song called Comment te dire adieu by Françoise Hardy, and it's fantastic. And I love it, and it's just the best of its kind.
Okay. Spotify link to that.
Spotify link to that.
Excellent.